Davy Crockett is an American icon, but who was the real man behind that iconic figure? There are plenty of exaggerations in Crockett's legend, but his real life was still full of danger, excitement, and yes, plenty of bears.
I'm David Crockett, fresh from the backwoods. I'm half horse, half alligator, and a little attached to a snapping turtle.
He was really French-Irish, but that's not nearly as catchy. Because you see, when you form a mental picture of Davy Crockett, it's one of a rugged outdoorsman in the woods or the mountaintops with some poor unsuspecting raccoon on his head as he explores the wilderness and fights a bear. That's the popular conception thanks to things like the television series and also because Crockett cultivated that image of himself.
I got the fastest horse, the prettiest sister, the surest rifle, and the ugliest dog in Tennessee.
When the incredibly successful 1831 play The Lion of the West first made Crockett a household name, he was well into his 40s, long past his days as an active explorer and voracious hunter who wandered the wilds of Tennessee for months at a time. To give the people what they wanted, which was all that mountaintop bear raccoon hat stuff, plus his own autobiography, which was also sort of full of that same stuff, Crockett posed for portraits and the trappings of his youthful conquests. He'd hold up a rifle so he could be painted with it, or pose surrounded by dogs, or stand in the midst of a stage scene that made it look like he was hunting. When it came to 19th century branding, Crockett nailed it.
There's nothing so absolutely unresistible as an old-fashioned good-natured grin.
Crockett's exploits on the wild frontier weren't well known until well after they happened. James Kirk Paulding's aforementioned play, The Lion of the West, opened at the Park Theater in New York City in 1831. The play was a barely disguised portrait of Crockett during his early years in the persona of a daring fellow named Colonel Nimrod Wildfire.
He felt like he was being made fun of, but as it turned out, the play actually made him an international celebrity.
We should point out that Nimrod wasn't a put-down yet. It meant hunter from the character in the Bible. Are you wondering where the put-down came from?
Precisely what I was wondering, my little Nimrod.
Yep, Looney Tunes. No kidding. Anyway, back to the story. The show sold out every night and provoked a great deal of interest in the real-life David Crockett. 2 years after the play opened, the first of many truth-stretching Crockett biographies was published, sketches and eccentricities of Colonel David Crockett of West Tennessee. Funny thing is that by that time, Crockett had served as a Tennessee state legislator and won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. If you think that popularity translated into some political clout, nope. More on that in a bit. Until you find out why. In 1954 and 55, a 5-part miniseries Davy Crockett aired on ABC as part of the Disneyland anthology series. It was so popular, it started a Davy Crockett fad that had Americans buying coonskin caps and sent 3 different versions of the theme song into the top 10. One of them went to number 1. According to the lyrics, which I'm not going to sing despite people wanting me to, Crockett was such a skilled and fearless outdoorsman that he killed him a bar when he was only 3. Those not fluent in 18th century backwoods Tennessee, that's a bear. And while that's highly unlikely, there's no historical record addressing the bear claim either way. Crockett doesn't even mention it in his autobiography, which makes it perhaps the only braggadocious factoid he left out. The reality is that he was more of a lover than a fighter.
I knew that bear wanted to hug me, so I reckon here's his chance.
Well, there was some fighter in him. He did claim to have killed 10 bears in a single spring in his younger years, and in late 1825, Crockett was invited to hunt on an acquaintance's vast bear-infested property. Crockett recalled, "He said they were extremely fat and very plenty, and I knowed that when they were fat, they were easily taken, for a fat bear can't run fast or long." That makes sense, if you're sure you know what's fat for a bear. But according to Crockett, he and his 8 dogs took down 15 bears in 2 weeks. And by the end of bear hunting season, Crockett claimed he'd taken down a grand total of 105 bears. Of course, that number was self-reported. Crockett was said to be a master of the fiddle, or as it was known on the early 19th century frontier, the devil's box. He was known to have taken his instrument on long treks into the wilderness and even into battle. Written accounts of what would be his last days during the Battle of the Alamo in 1836 talk about Crockett offering comfort to the besieged Texans in the form of familiar folk songs as they fought off Mexican troops, or playing danceable songs during moments of rest. It may be apocryphal, but historical texts suggest that Crockett played the fiddle during his final moments. After Santa Anna ordered the last captured defenders killed, his buglers performed their execution song called El Degüello, or the Slaughter. At that moment, Crockett supposedly struck up the Tennessee March.
He was a man with great political ambitions who got into trouble because he was also very independent-minded, so he wouldn't always play ball.
Having fought alongside military commander Andrew Jackson in the Creek War and the War of 1812, Crockett was a supporter and ally when his colleague was elected president in 1828. But he immediately and emphatically withdrew his support following the passage of the Jackson-championed Indian Removal Act of 1830. That law was the cause of the Trail of Tears, and you know what that was. Being against that was right in character for old Davy.
Crockett was always the congressman of the little guy.
In 1831, he was running for a third term in the U.S. House of Representatives, campaigning on his opposition to Jackson. But the president and his policies were very popular with the people of Tennessee, and Crockett lost his seat in Congress. He returned to the House as a member of the rival Whig Party in 1833 and continued to oppose Jackson's methods.
There is nothing that will make me vote to force them off their homelands.
In 1835, voters again expelled Crockett from the House of Representatives. In 1835, Crockett was in what would be his final 2-year term in the House of Representatives. On January 30th of that year, he attended a state funeral on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building for the late representative from South Carolina, Warren Davis. Despite a contentious and adversarial relationship with Congress at the time, President Jackson also attended the solemn event alongside Crockett. As a group of high-powered politicians exited the building and walked past the east portico, a would-be assassin named Richard Lawrence jumped out of the crowd of mourners and observers and opened fire on Jackson. Or at least he tried. Both of Lawrence's pistols malfunctioned in the moment, giving the president and his associates time to overpower him. Witnesses say that Jackson, in poor health and walking with the help of a cane at the time, used it to give Lawrence a thorough whacking. Crockett, meanwhile, along with U.S. Navy Lieutenant Thomas Gedney, physically overpowered Lawrence and helped get Jackson safely into the carriage, whisking him away to safety. Speaking of the old pew-pews, Crockett was the subject of many portraits and other paintings during his lifetime, and he was frequently shown holding a shotgun. Any of those guns may have been identified as Betsy, a name Crockett bestowed on his favorite firearms more than once. As a gift commemorating his time in the Tennessee State Assembly in the 1820s, Crockett's supporters gave him a flintlock rifle that he called Old Betsy. If you didn't know, Betsy is an affectionate and diminutive version of Elizabeth, a name shared by one of Crockett's wives as well as one of his sisters. Nearly 2 centuries later, it remains unclear which woman, if any, was the namesake for Old Betsy. The same can be said of another of Crockett's most treasured guns, Pretty Betsy, although some records say that name was actually Beautiful Betsy. That one, a cap rifle, was given to Crockett by Whig Party officials in Philadelphia in 1834. While Crockett appreciated both guns, they were such precious personal heirlooms that he handed them over to associates before he left to fight at the Battle of the Alamo in 1836. A surprising number of factoids is known about his childhood, if we trust his autobiography, that is. At the age of 13, Davy Crockett began attending a rural school near his family's home in Franklin County, Tennessee, and he hated it from day one. In Davy Crockett's own story, as written by himself, he writes, "I went 4 days and had just begun to learn my letters a little when I had an unfortunate falling out with one of the scholars, a boy much larger and older than myself. I concluded to wait until I could get him out, and then I was determined to give him salt and vinegar." Crockett hid in some bushes near the school, waiting for the bully to pass by on his evening walk home. He described what happened, writing, "He and his company came on, sure enough, and I pitched out from the bushes and set on him like a wildcat. I scratched his face all to a flitter jig and soon made him cry out for quarters in good earnest. Whatever a flitter jig is, it must have been serious, because that confrontation would change the course of Crockett's life." Once his tormentor was handled, Crockett found himself having second thoughts. Worried that a schoolmaster would physically punish him, Crockett skipped school for a few days and hid in the woods. When the school sent a note to his father asking where he was, Crockett knew he was in for it. Between the threat of a beating at home and another at school, plus the likelihood of the bully deciding to make him pay for the beating, Crockett took off, writing, "I went to the house of an acquaintance a few miles off who was just about to start with a drove, and I hired myself to go with him." For nearly 2 years, Crockett worked as an itinerant laborer. His family had no idea where he was, and when he returned home at age 15, he claimed some of them didn't recognize him. Crockett was so delusioned by losing his congressional seat that he left Tennessee for good in November 1835. According to the Texas Standard, he said, "You may all go to hell and I will go to Texas." Crockett headed to the disputed Southwestern Territory at the peak of the Texas Revolution, which was being fought by American slaveholders who wanted independence for the region and the Mexican government, who claimed the land. And that's what the Battle of the Alamo was really about. Crockett settled in San Antonio in February 1836, pledging loyalty to the Texas Republic and committing himself to help defend the Alamo. Within days of Crockett's arrival, forces led by Mexico's General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna stormed the fort, killing about 200 soldiers and their allies. Crockett was killed in the battle, but just how and when he died remains something of a mystery. The only adult to survive the Battle of the Alamo was an enslaved person identified only as Joe, who testified to seeing Crockett's body lying amidst dozens of other war dead. But unconfirmed reports of Texans who surrendered to Mexico were published in the newspapers, listing Crockett among that contingent. The surrender part didn't work out for any of those. They were all executed. Either way, it didn't end with Davy swinging his rifle at advancing troops. A post-mortem Crockett biography, Colonel Crockett's Exploits and Adventures in Texas, took major creative liberties with the story, adding to the mythical canon of Crockett lore, and even claiming that Crockett was shot after his capture, rather than during the battle itself. It's possible. There's one other weird quirk that geography nerds love to point out. Davy Crockett is generally thought to have come from the area where the South meets Appalachia, but when it comes to what state he was born in, would you believe it was a place called Franklin? That's right. In August 1786, Crockett was born in what's now eastern Tennessee, but which at the time was considered part of Franklin, a proposed U.S. state that never happened. The far-flung residents of western North Carolina decided to create a new kinda state in 1785, based almost entirely on their very strong feelings that doctors and lawyers were too intellectually different from the common man and shouldn't be allowed to serve as legislators. In case you didn't quite get that, the proposed Frankliners wanted a state law banning lawyers from serving as lawmakers. Moving right along. Representatives from the existing 13 colonies, soon to be states, voted on adding a 14th. That would be Franklin. But the yes votes didn't meet the required 2/3 majority. The colony of North Carolina refused to recognize Franklin, so there went what would have been a state just a bit bigger than Connecticut. It wasn't every bit of present-day Tennessee, just right around 12 counties. For more fun with geography now, all of present-day Tennessee was part of North Carolina, but right before it became a state in late 1789, they ceded that Tennessee part back to the government. Tennessee, all of it, including the Franklin parts, became a state in 1796. That's a lot of geography to say that the song lied, but also songs don't really have time to explain complicated geography, so Born on a Mountaintop in Tennessee is just fine.